All right, well, it is 2 p.m. Eastern, so let's go ahead and get started. We have a lot of great content to share today with our guest expert. But first, thank you for joining us today for this Ask the Experts webinar. I'm Allison Phillips, Director of Marketing on Cox Media's corporate team, and I will be your host today. Some quick housekeeping items before I introduce our guest expert. This presentation is being recorded. You'll receive an email with the recording so you can watch it again at your convenience or share with your teams. We have about 45 minutes of great content for you and 10 minutes or so set aside for Q&A. If at any time during the presentation you have a question, don't hesitate to type it into the question box on your screen, and we'll get to as many as we can at the end of the presentation. A number of you submitted questions ahead of time when you were registering, so we'll make sure we get to as many of those as we can as well. And now that that's out of the way, I'm so excited to introduce you to today's guest expert, Sunny Grasso. Sunny is the culture chief at Delivering Happiness, an organization pioneering culture change for organizations around the world, including companies like Starbucks and Sallie Mae. Sunny uses the science behind happiness to help these companies create better human experiences, leading to greater business results. As a founding member of Delivering Happiness, she brings her diverse background, enthusiastic approach, and proven methods to deliver genuine outcomes, tapping into both highs and lows to create cultures that adapt and thrive through changing times. And I think we are all very used to changing times at this point. So on top of all of that, Sunny is a level 1 sake sommelier. Didn't even know that existed. Would love to talk to you more about that offline, Sunny. But if you are currently facing the struggle of attracting the right employees to fill your open job positions, you are not alone. And in this session, Sunny's going to walk us through the specific elements you need in your company culture to positively impact employee recruitment and retention with actionable insights you can implement to make a difference now. So with that, I will hand it over to you, Sunny.
Thank you so much, Allison. Hello, everyone. It's just really great to be here with all of the Cox clients and members. And I will admit that I'm not coming to you from my home. I'm coming to you from a hotel room in Las Vegas because travel has started again around this little concept of happiness. You know, just tiny little idea that was on the back burner for a while that I would like to invite us to focus on a little bit more today and really think about how you can utilize this concept in your business in an effective way. So I want to start with a little question. Why do you do anything that you do? So think about that for a moment. What is your why for just about anything? And it's not a little question, as we know, it's sort of a big esoteric question, but you could boil it down to a smaller question. And you could simply ask yourself, well, what are some of your goals in life? And if you got one in mind right now, maybe you would say, well, I want to run my business more smoothly or grow it again. And if you ask yourself, well, why is that important to me? And you come to an answer, and then ask yourself again, why is that important to me? And what we see is that most of the time, what it comes down to is something like happiness. Well, I want to be happy, or I want the people that I love around me to be happy. So what we see is really there's two basic human motivators. We're either moving away from something, we're trying to survive, or we are moving towards something and trying to thrive with very different approaches and very different outcomes at work. And this is not a new concept. We've been talking about human thriving and happiness for thousands of years. Way back in the day, Aristotle said that really happiness is the purpose of our existence. But he also said that we're bad at it. So we're not good at sustaining our own happiness. And I think it would be pretty interesting if he was around today to see what he would think about the idea of happiness being a buzzword for 2022. So it's actually become sort of a new category of engagement. Right alongside perks and benefits, organizations are starting to say, well, how do we improve our happiness or well-being to attract and retain the talent that we want? Which is something we'll talk about today. But I have another question for you. How has your happiness been lately? So think about this. Where were you in 2020 BC? Now, I'm not talking about before Christ. So I'm talking about the other BC of our time, which is before COVID. And where are you now in 2022 AC? So after COVID. And if you think about that for a moment, if you think about where you were just a couple of years ago and now, most of us have been through sort of a before and after period where we've examined so many things in our lives that almost nothing looks the same. Things have evolved tremendously. I'll share a little bit of my personal journey with you. In BC, I was kind of here. I don't know how many Star Wars fans there are out there, but here's one right here. So I was Baby Yoda, wide-eyed, and things were moving really fast, and it was very exciting. Businesses were picking up. And sort of towards the middle of COVID, I started to look like this. A few more grays, a few more wrinkles, and now, towards the end, my journey has ended up something more like this. There's been a gain in wisdom, experience, and in knowledge of ourselves and what's important to us and important to our happiness. But really, it's been complicated. I mean, let's be honest, there's been, already there was a complicated world and it's moved into complexities. And for that, it takes not just having a lot of things going on in the environment, that makes it complicated. For example, distributed systems, AI and robotics, and social unrest and inequalities in race and gender, climate change, a global pandemic, a recession, war now in Ukraine. So all of these things create complication, but complexity is when there's so many moving elements that we can no longer plan for those elements around us. And what that creates is a state of this. It creates VUCA. Now, this is an old term from wartime. On the front lines, they would talk about living with VUCA, and this is a state of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And what all of that complexity and moving parts means is that as business owners and as leaders, it's hard for us to plan because things are changing so constantly around us. And it's also been impacting our lives, our neighborhoods, and our livelihoods in ways that most of us had not anticipated. So we know that small businesses make up 99.9% of the businesses in the United States, and we've seen up to 1/3 of businesses close their doors, changing our lives and changing our employees' lives. So it's also been amplifying what was already there. So these things were there in the background. Disengagement was on the rise for a long time. There was micromanagement tendencies, or burnout was happening in pockets, discrimination and stress. All of these were things that were there, but a lot smaller. And what's happened is they've become bigger and more magnified. So we actually see that magnifying these has led us to this sort of what we know as the Great Resignation, or call it what you want. I heard it called the Great Quit the other day. We can call it the Great Discontent even, because it's highlighted something in us that was already brewing underneath the surface. And those things have come to light in a really dramatic way that has caused us a lot of challenges as business owners. 46 million people quit. So we're looking at 73% of businesses having trouble attracting. And what that equals today, it's still happening. We still have nearly 50% of employees that are either actively looking to work or casually looking to leave. So it's continuing while we try to figure out how to adapt ourselves. So if we choose to think of it in the light of more of a great awakening, we see that humans have had the time in that before and after event to awaken to more of what's important to them. More meaning, more purpose, possibly more freedom, more time with family, for a more human connection. And that's a big change, because the way that things were for a very long time is that work came first. You work for a life. Now what we're seeing is things have become very different. Instead of saying, I'm going to go to work, and in the workplace, that's going to affect my home life, and my home life will affect my relationships and my family, and even my resilience and my capacity as a human being to grow and flourish. We're changing the dynamics of that. Imagine those arrows going the other way. People are saying, wait a second, we spend 1/3 of our lives at work. That's half our waking hours. Is this what I want from my life? What's most important to me? Is it work first? Now it's actually become more that life contains work. So we see a shift to the whole being. You know, it's not that we were ever one person at home and one person at work. We were just asked to put aside some of ourselves to show up to that workplace. And now it's more about we're one being in work and life. So our well-being is really about our whole being and showing up holistically to work. And yet, humans, individuals, we're experiencing the impact, the same stress and uncertainty and VUCA that comes from organizations. It manifests itself a little bit different in individuals. It's creating this. It's a state of FUD. I don't know how many of you have heard of this, but this is about fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And those things are fine when they're short term, but when we live in a long-term ongoing state of FUD, it starts to affect our mental capacity. And that means we've seen things like worry go up 66%, daily stress. That's really important. That means every day we're waking up and feeling stress at work, and burnout has been on the rise, including more dramatic things like suicide. But it's interesting because our well-being levels, they've dropped to the lowest since the Great Depression. About 50% of us say we are not doing well, yet engagement has gone up. And we've never seen this before. We've never seen engagement go up while well-being goes down. So we're finding things that we value while we have been asked to adapt at a rate that's been kind of crushing us. And this is what I'm talking about with adaptation. Humans, we like to adapt a little bit. We like something like this over time. This is about a 10 to 15% adaptation rate. If part of our environment is stable, 85 to 90%, we're comfortable with a little change. It's novel and it's fun. But the adaptation around us, the change has been exponential. And I know that word has been overused, but it's what we're seeing. The change has created a rapid need to adapt that we've never seen before. So how do we bridge that gap between what we can do and between the rate of change that we're asked to adapt to? Well, in the middle, what allows us to acclimate to that is our well-being. If we are stressed, if we are burnt out, if we are tired and drained, we can't get up and go and figure out that new tool, that new demand at work. We feel too tired for it. So our well-being is really responsible for a lot of our capacity to adapt. So our capacity is a function of our emotional well-being. So maybe now more than ever, organizations still want profitable businesses. We want to do well. And we also, now more than ever, maybe are aware that we want more healthy and meaningful lives. But we can't have those without happier customers, and we can't have those without happier employees. So it's a simple equation that goes all the way back to the happiness and the well-being of our employees. And maybe it's more true now than ever. And what we see is that when we have happy, healthy, functioning employees and team members, that our capacity to adapt, it goes up about 200%. So, you know, Darwin said that it's not the strongest of species that survive. It's those that are the most responsive to change. So we may start to think about this in terms of our businesses as well. So what is our strength and our capacity to adapt? And we've seen some businesses that historically have not survived. There's some great examples out there. Remember Blockbuster? Remember the BlackBerry? And then we've seen organizations who have done incredible jobs pivoting and adapting. Airbnb was one of the hardest hit by the pandemic, and they've come back and flourished. So we could also think of this time in another lens, which is the great adaptation. And the organizations that are adapting, they are figuring out how to attract and how to retain. They're winning at that, because what we see is lower turnover, lower absenteeism, and higher profitability, productivity, and higher attraction and retention. Those are all numbers that we care about and we want to see. So how do we, as business owners, attract and retain talent in sort of this new normal in a VUCA world? Well, I wanted to bring in some of the experts to talk about this a little bit. And these are people at the end of their lives. So Bonnie Ware is a palliative care nurse, and she was taking care of people in the last few weeks of their lives. And she started to notice this phenomenal clarity of vision that they had as they were getting ready to pass on. So she collected them and they became so popular, she wrote a book on it. These are the top 5 wishes of the dying. Now, I'm not going to read them all, but number 3 is, I wish I had let myself be happier. So that one always kind of gets to me, because when they reached that point where they were looking back over their lives, they had realized that their happiness had been a choice that they hadn't made because of various reasons, because they had let other people's ideas get in the way, or even their own ideas had become blurry to them. And the number one regret of the dying is I wished I'd had the courage to live a life that was true to myself, not the life that others wanted for me. So once again, faced with this is not to get sort of, down, or to say, what's your eulogy going to be? But it is to say that we have a chance right now to change these wishes to I lived, and to learn from this knowledge. So the courage to live a life true to myself is a realization that when they got to the end, they had lived other people's dreams and ideas of what happiness meant. And the goals that they had achieved, they weren't necessarily their own. Sometimes they had even been pretending to themselves to be happy. So what we can learn about this in the workplace, maybe again now that we're closer than ever to some of these truths that we've been in many of our lives, is the importance of being true to ourselves. Some of you have heard of a little company called Google. They love to measure things. They measure, how long you should wait in the line so that you actually make a connection with the person behind you. And one of the things they decided to measure was, hey, well, what makes the perfect team? How do we get that team that's the most innovative and creative and then collaborative and they get along? And so they looked at all kinds of things. They looked at who was invited to the team, leadership styles. They worked at when and where they worked. So what do you think was the number one thing that created a great team? And just answer in your mind for a moment. The number one thing was actually psychological safety. It was the ability for team members to feel that they could be themselves, that they could show up. They didn't have to put a mask on or pretend to be a certain way. So it was about psychological safety, to be able to say and do and be who they were. So unfortunately, only about 30% of people actually feel seen and heard. They feel that it's safe to be who they are at work. But when we change that, if we can move that to 60%, then we start to see some amazing results, such as a 50% reduction in turnover. Numbers that really impact our bottom line and that cost us a lot of money as small businesses. So we have to start to think about, how do we create an environment where people can be true to themselves? And to do this, we have to go back to that concept. It's about not just showing up at work and getting the job done. It's about whole being, inviting the whole human into the workplace. And we can do this in a pretty simple way as well. And it starts with the person that you know better than anybody else in the world. It starts with you. So it starts by looking at your own life and understanding how you can show up more whole. So I'm going to share a little story about this, hopefully to encourage you to think about your own story, your own journey of highs and lows. We've all had them, especially in the last few years. And my story starts off pretty good. When I was young, I grew up with two moms, and now I'm not Gen X or millennial, I'm older than that. So at this time, it was something you absolutely didn't talk about. So we didn't, we kept it to ourselves, but my moms gave me bumper stickers that said things like question authority. And we had a unique upbringing. I learned how to be courageous and make my own rules and be innovative. And it was great until everybody at school found out. And you know how cruel kids can be. I ended up being that person that walks into the lunchroom and everybody scatters, leaving me alone. Not only did I find myself alone at work, but I also found myself alone as my mothers got into a court case. They decided to spend their money after coming into an inheritance as a married couple. We all know that marriage between women wasn't legal for a long time, and the state of New York found out and came in. They sued them, they won, and right when I was graduating from high school, both of my mothers ended up going to prison. So at that point, I found myself really alone, and I had to ask myself, was my approach working? This being different and doing things differently wasn't working so well. So you know what I did? I rebounded. I went to a good 4-year university, and I said, I'm going to conform. I'm going to do things the way that I've been told. I'm going to work hard and get good grades. And that's what I did. I got so excited to go out and to get into my first job. And I remember riding the subway down in New York City and riding the elevator up the Empire State Building for my first job. And then I got there and I was shown promptly to my cubicle. And I quickly realized that this would not be a place where I could survive or thrive. People were pressing by with expressionless faces. In fact, the only time they seemed animated was when they talked about the weekend. So I quickly realized people were at work in order to escape work. And it really scared the bejesus out of me. So I did what any normal, young 20-something would do. I moved. I started over again. I moved all the way across the country to California, where naturally I wanted to work in some place that would make me happy. So I became a bartender. And I thought, drinking makes me really happy. So I started pouring other people drinks and enjoying it. But then I realized that I had a hangover. And that hangover wasn't just on the weekend. It started to be a hangover because I wasn't being all I could be. I felt limited. So I started job hopping. I worked in a startup and another startup and another startup. And pretty soon I found that I wasn't getting any higher in my happiness, even though I was getting a raise every time I moved from one job to another. I wasn't finding any more well-being. And right around then I started running, probably away from the emptiness that I felt growing, and I didn't know what to do with it. But I did know that when I was running, I forgot about it. And that worked for a while. I became an ultra marathon runner. I ran 100 miles over the mountains of the Sierra Nevadas. Really was trying to run away from that feeling until I hurt myself. And that's when the dot-com bust happened as well. Companies were gone overnight, including mine. And I found myself without a job. And right at that time, somebody gave me a book called Delivering Happiness. And it was about a different approach to happiness, not through pursuing things externally or money or title or status, not about pursuing success in that way, but about pursuing it internally through passion and purpose. So that became a new high in my life. Now I know most of us have had a more recent low. We've lost people in the pandemic. And my story is probably similar to many of yours. I lost my boyfriend, my roommate, my apartment, and we lost our co-founder, Tony Hsieh, the co-founder of Zappos and of Delivering Happiness at much too young an age. So I share this with you to show you how valuable it can be to start to think about your life in terms of what's been important to you through your highs and lows. If you plotted them on a chart, what would some of your highs and lows be? And when you are in those lows, the thing is the lows give us this incredible capacity to catapult us to the next high because we see what we've taken for granted. We see what's really important to us there. So what's been conspicuously absent in those lows that's meaningful and valuable to you? And we can start to see what's truly important in our lives. So it's not necessarily about highs and lows. There are highs and lows, there's pleasure, there's pain, there's praise, there's blame, and through it all is really the opportunity for us to learn who we are. Carl Jung said the opportunity of a lifetime is to become who we are. So it's about finding meaning and what's most important to us through those highs and lows. So a question for you as leaders is, how do you invite the whole human, highs and lows and everything included, beyond their role? How do you invite people to show up, not as, AJ from HR or from marketing or who runs the front desk, but as a real human being with all of their emotions and their highs and lows, so that we can start to invite more of that whole being experience into the workplace? For example, we have really outworn the saying, how are you? That means nothing these days. There's a company called Pixar, which says, how are you really, really? And that's an invitation that says, I'm listening. I'm ready to hear how you really, really are doing. So even very simple things like showing up and listening and inviting the whole human in a conversation can start to change how much we feel that we can be whole in our workplace. Remember this? So I bring this up, Maslow's hierarchy of human needs. I think most of us studied this back in school. And it's an old one, but it's still so relevant today. And the thing is that Maslow said what one can be, one must. That means whatever we are capable of doing, we feel that we have to gravitate towards that, to move up towards that level of self-actualization. So our true aspiration as humans is always in some way to manifest who we fully are. it's always to manifest who we fully are. I just wanted to say that again, because if we can show up as leaders and help our employees understand and become who they fully are, then we are creating loyalty, attraction, retention, and we are helping the humans around us through being there for them. So I added a little something to this, which is Wi-Fi, because these days we can't live without that as well. So that's a little bit about the science of happiness, but what else can we learn from the science? Well, really importantly, there's 3 different types of happiness when we think about this, and they have a really different impact on our lasting well-being. So the shortest type is pleasure. If you want a quick pop of happiness, then give somebody a piece of chocolate or go and buy a new pair of shoes. And really, we call this the rock star high, because in order to sustain this type of happiness, you got to be a rock star, like Daenerys Starborn. The other type of happiness, a little longer lasting, is about passion. So we've all been involved in a passion project or planning a wedding, or for me, creating this presentation for you. It's where all time falls away in the workplace and you become one with the project that you're doing. It's almost a state of mindfulness in your work. And this was created by a guy named Mikai Csikszentmihalyi. And we are just glad he didn't name the concept after himself. So the last type, the longest lasting type of happiness is higher purpose. So unfortunately, this isn't taught in schools, but this is essentially about being a part of something bigger than yourselves, beyond profit, beyond title. And if we can start to focus more on the lasting types of happiness, then we can weather the highs and lows, and we can fortify that with sort of the grounding, the stability of what's meaningful and important to us. So it makes sense to focus more on the longer lasting types of happiness, not just at home and in our lives, but also it makes sense to apply this to the workplace. So really importantly, money is not enough. It's really easy to say, I've got other priorities. I give them a paycheck. That's what they come in for. They should know their own purpose. They should take care of their own happiness. But if we just focus on the money, then we're going to be attracting people who really care mostly about the money. And that's fine for short-term projects. We can also think about this as the carrot and the stick, give them a reward or a punishment. And these work really great when we have something quick to do, but it does not create long-term commitment. It does not create loyalty, and it does not encourage your retention. What does is intrinsic motivation. So working with people's passions, with what they care about, giving them more of a sense of pride and meaning. This creates more of a connection to the organization and the people that we're in. So this creates loyalty to you and to your business, and this creates retention, and guess what? It also creates attraction, which we'll talk a little bit more about. So it comes down to not just what we're doing, but it also comes down to whose responsibility is it to create more well-being or happiness in the workplace? So as I said earlier, it starts with the most important person in your life. Just like your highs and lows story, it starts with you. So from the me, only focusing on our own happiness and understanding what's most important to us, can we then extend it to the we, to our team, and to the community? And that could be your customers or your patients or your partners even. So this is harder than it sounds though, because it requires that we do the difficult work of helping ourselves access our happiness more. You ever realize that some people bring happiness wherever they go and others bring happiness whenever they go? So we probably all know somebody who's like that. They're grumpy. They don't want to be happy themselves. And we can't look at them really and say, oh gosh, what are they doing? Because there's times that we're all not good at providing for our own happiness. It takes work and focus. It means we have to sit in the discomfort of changing ourselves, of changing our own habits. And a lot of times that calls up a lot of ghosts from our past that we haven't wanted to look at. Change is hard. But when we do make that adaptation ourselves, then we can ripple that out to our teams and to the people around us. So, one thing to realize is that we're always affecting or infecting the people around us. So we have an emotional wake. When we walk through the room, when we walk through the world, we're bringing people up or we are bringing people down. So it's up to us to choose, not just for ourselves, but also how we want to affect the we and the community, knowing that we're rippling our impact all the time around us. And so it really does start with leadership. And it goes back to the basics of leadership, having empathy, being able to be vulnerable, first to show up and to look at our own story and to ask what truly makes me happy? What do I value in my life? And can I live that consistently day in and day out? Can I be a living, breathing example of my values, of what's important to me and the business? And can I create accountability for myself around that? So for example, there was this company called Evernote. They're still around. They were one of those unicorns back in the day. And this is Phil Libin, the CEO. One thing that's very important at Evernote, they're a note company. They're all about communication. It's one of the ideas they were founded on. Every day, Phil is there behind the espresso bar, taking a shift to serve his employees an espresso along with all the other leaders. They've all committed to this to create accountability themselves, to encourage communication and connection with their employees. So ask yourself, how is it that you're committing to what's most important in your organization, to what's most important to you as a leader? And this is how we start to flip the great resignation, the great quit, as you want to call it, into the great attraction. Gallup says that it takes over a 20% pay raise to lure an employee away from a good leader or manager. So we can flip that number on its head by how we show up as leaders and managers. And that starts with focusing on ourselves. So what else can small businesses do? So this is our model, delivering happiness, and it's been extracted from things like the science of happiness. Did you know there's 20 years of research in the field of how to help humans and groups of humans thrive? So if we apply that to the workplace, we can start to understand how to create an environment that's sustainable and consistent to create a thriving possibility for all of our employees. And we know that Gen X and millennials, the number one thing that they want is well-being at work. So it starts on the bottom of this equation with the idea of values, and not just values, but also behaviors. So we were talking about this a little earlier. What's most important to you? And if you start to define your values, even as a small business, or maybe more importantly so, because it's easier when you're small, people are going to feel them anyways. What you can do is say, this is what we stand for. You know, we stand for being true to your weird self. We stand for inspiration, for building community, for showing up with empathy. When you send that bat signal out, your people start to find you. And that means they can be themselves at work, and so can you. And that is one of the most valuable things that we can do. It's just that it's not that easy to do, is it? To define your values and actually live them. But start by asking, what are your personal values? What are your highs and lows in that heartbeat? And what are the values that were consistent through the highs and the lows? And then make those values meaningful, measurable, and then make them accountable. So use them at that point to attract and retain and create sort of this retention tool. So this is how it can work with values. What happens with most organizations? Growth and complexity, it increases. We're in a time of complexity, unprecedented for many of us. What we do, we throw more rules at it. You can do this, you can't do that. We're gonna mandate this, please don't do that. Rules control the chaos, but then freedom and autonomy start to go down with all those rules, and guess what? So does retention of our high-performing employees. More than ever now, we have had a taste of more freedom and flexibility, and that's what the younger generations want. 50% of the workforce is made up of that younger generation. The alternative, as chaos and complexity increases, culture and values, guidelines direct us to make decisions, direct us to make those choices. So freedom and autonomy instead goes up, and so does retention of our high-performing employees and our happiness. And this is what I'm talking about. This tattoo on this guy's arm, that is our logo. So this guy joined when I did about 11 years ago. He fell so in love with the company that he got it tattooed on his arm, the logo. It certainly isn't going anywhere. And this is what this can create. It can create that kind of commitment and loyalty and attraction that people want to put a permanent stamp on their arm. And then what do you think he does? Well, actually what he did do is he went out and started delivering happiness to Spain, and he started to attract and recruit all over the globe global partners. He's now in charge of our global partnerships. So he's telling everyone out there, I work for this great company, you should too. So not only does your retention go up, your attraction does by your word of mouth. So here's a tool for you, and I'm going to tell you how to get this deck in the end. You don't need to screenshot it if you don't want, but think of your highs and your lows and do your happiness heartbeats. Now you can do this also for your organization. Over the last 5 years, you can ask, what have our highs and our lows been? What values were consistent through them? And then start to test those values, strength test them. Here's a test for you right now. So if you were kind of not paying attention before, I'll invite you back because I'm going to give you a quick quiz in a moment. I'd love your opinion on this. So on the side, you see values, living going up. And on the bottom is performance. So on this graph, we can have people that have low values and low performance. So what do you do with those people? Well, that's pretty simple, right? You basically tell those people bye-bye. But then we also have people that have high values and low performance. This is like the nice guy, the nice gal who, doesn't really get the job done that well, but gosh, they fit in and they're so nice and they learn. And then we have people who are high performers with a low values fit, AKA the brilliant jerk. Probably we've all known one of these, if not in your business now, previously. And then of course, we have the high values fit and the high performance. Those are your rock stars. So what do you do in these cases? Well, with the high values, high performance, we're going to promote them, right? We're going to encourage them and keep them. But the question for you is, what do you do with the brilliant jerk? So I'd like for you to go to your quiz box, your text box for a moment here. And I'm going to give you a couple of choices in a moment. What do you do with a brilliant jerk? So here's a couple of choices. A, you promote them so that others can be brilliant along with them. B, you keep them, but you put them in isolation. You make sure that they work on their own. You try to keep them away from others so that they don't sort of bring everyone down. C, you coach them on values, on how to be more empathetic, how to be more of a team player. Or D, you let them go. So go ahead and put your answers in the chat box now. What do you do with the high performer who has a low values fit, AKA the brilliant jerk? Do you A, promote them, B, keep them in isolation, C, do you coach them, or D, do you let them go? What do you think, Allison? Do we have a couple answers coming in?
We do. It looks like everyone is typing C, coach them on values.
Big win for C. Beautiful. So those are the kinds of decisions that we're going to have to make when we commit to living a values-based organization. And if they don't start to improve, if they remain the brilliant jerk, then what do we have to do? We have to make the decision, even though it's so hard to find people, to let them go, because it only takes that one rotten apple to bring the whole group down. You're actually sacrificing the performance and the morale of your whole team if you're not taking care of what's going on with that one individual. So next step, layer in. So in the middle of this model, we have the science of happiness, things like a sense of progress, a sense of control, and connectedness. So we're going to look at these quickly. We have had so much out of our control lately. We can think about this in terms of a lens or your locus of control or your focus of control, so to say, things that are outside of our control. These are things like the recession, the war in Ukraine, global politics, toilet paper, the price of gasoline. We can't control all of those things. If we try to focus on controlling those, we're going to have a hard time. But if we zoom in, the things that are within our control are things like having a say, being consulted, Things like transparency, not having a vacuum of information, even when leaders don't know what the answer is. So knowledge sharing. Our job as leaders is to put the employee in the middle. Give them as much a sense of control as is possible. Imagine them having more choice, more say, having more information. And that's hard to do when it comes to transparency, because a lot of times as leaders, we feel like we have to have an answer. And most of the times, a lot of times today, we don't, as things are changing. So courage required to say, I don't know, but this is what I can tell you. And this is what I'm seeing as well. So we can do things like giving them choice over the important things to them. For example, a lot of organizations are doing job crafting and role crafting, not just saying these are the positions that we have open, but saying you've been here for a year, you're a wonderful fit, you're skilled at many things, where do you want to grow? What would you like to do next? And then very simply, a lot of organizations are saying, what would your title be? Something that doesn't change much in the way that we function can change tremendously the experience of our employees. For example, there's one doctor's office in New York, and there was somebody at a talk who said, you know what, I love going to my doctor's office. And I thought, well, gosh, who loves going to their doctor's office? So obviously I said, well, why? And they said, well, you know, the receptionist is so great to me. And one day I asked her, I said, you know, you are so great. You know, what makes you feel so good at work? And she said, well, you know, I'm not just here as a receptionist. I'm the director of first impressions. And that was a title she was able to give herself that completely changed her perception of how she worked. So what are the small things that are meaningful that you can give your people control over? All right, another very important one. What is the number one reason you think that employees leave? Yes, the number one person they leave is the manager. That's true, that hasn't changed. But the number one reason is that they don't feel appreciated. They don't feel seen and heard, and they don't feel that they're making progress. So we can help employees feel progress, and this is huge. It can make such an impact. Maybe you've reached a goal, but you don't even recognize it, because at the end of one project, you celebrate that by starting another one. Or maybe we've had a great sales day, but we go right into our next shift and we don't recognize it. So slowing down and recognizing the progress that we're making at work together and in our personal lives, reaching personal goals, can help people feel that they are growing in meaningful ways. And that is showing up for somebody in a human way that creates the kind of loyalty and well-being in our employees that also creates retention and attraction. For example, the annual review, we know it's dead. So many organizations have gone to something like the monthly review. You try to tell your employees what they're doing well and how they can improve monthly. That's still not enough for the younger generations. What you can do is break it down even to weekly or daily to help them feel that progress on a consistent basis. So another question for you. Oh, first a tool. There's so many ways that we can do this in person, right? It's a little harder when we're remote. One way that crosses all the boundaries is simply think of one win to kick off your meetings. What is one win that either one person has had, or go around, if it's a small team, give everybody 30 seconds to say one win, or do this yourself at the end of the day first and see the impact. And then ask, what is the meaning in that? What matters about that one win? For example, I turned a customer's experience around right at the counter. What matters about that win? They're coming back and I feel good because I was empowered to do it. And then dissect your success. You know, we are so good at dissecting our failures, but if we only learn from our failures, we're only going to really learn how not to fail. What we want to help ourselves and others learn is how to succeed. What made that moment possible? Well, you know what? I was in a good mood. I felt supported by my colleagues around us. And you know what? I also felt empowered to make that decision, for example. So zoom in on what it is that helps us create wins and give everybody an opportunity to do it. Okay, are you ready? I've got another one for you. 60% of us want feedback daily or weekly. And you know what, even more, almost 80% of us find feedback valuable. What percent do you think actually gets at that feedback on a daily or weekly basis. So head over to your chat box again. Is it A, 15%, B, 30% of us actually get feedback daily? Or is it C, 35, or D, 40%? What do you think? So head over for one more poll in your chat box. I'm curious where we land on this. And Allison, what do you see?
We're getting a lot of A's, 15%.
Very good. That's, you know what, that's a little pessimistic of the group. So we've got some work to do there. Just kidding. It's about 30%. So it still is quite low. Out of 60% of us, we're really only seeing about 30% of us getting it. Now, there's a lot of reasons for that, right? So many of us have had the experience of getting bad feedback, or we've gotten the you-know-what sandwich, positive, negative, positive. So we have to also evolve that in a more human way. So consider feedback with a growth mindset, just purely telling somebody what they did well, based on their actions, not on who they are, on what they did. For example, you handled that customer with integrity. I saw you go through the options in your mind and you chose well. So we can actually ask them too. Give them more choice. Couple this with that sense of control. I have some feedback for you. Is now a good time? Yes or no? I saw the way that you handled that customer and I was really impressed with how calm and patient you were. What else would you like to improve about your customer service and experience? So put the control back in their court and learn how to give that instantaneous feedback on the moment, on the spot. People want to feel in all of this chaos that they're going in the right direction. Help your employees see that. So the last piece here is a sense of connectedness. And we have all seen the impact of our greatest work from home experiment in the pandemic. So if you look at loneliness over the last 50 years, we have seen a steady increase from the 1950s and 60s of loneliness. It's gone up and it is at the highest level ever now. It's around 65% these days. And do you think it gets better or worse with the younger generations? I know probably most of you have said it gets worse. It does. So something that we have to change our mindset on is it is not about the breadth of connections we have. It's no longer about having 100 friends on Facebook or getting 20 likes on your Instagram post. Probably a lot more for that than for other people. But it is about depth of connectedness. That means there's people that you can call and be your true, vulnerable, unmasked, raw self with. That means you can call them up when you are having a confusing moment, or maybe you're on the verge of burnout and you're about to lose it, and you can tell them whatever's on your mind. So how many people do you think it takes to have these effects that you see on your screen of connectedness? How many people do you need in your life that you can call up and be your true self with? It's really simple. It is one person in the workplace. So it is not enough to get along with the people that you work with. We have to encourage more depth of connections and friendships. And yet, amazingly, there was just a study that came out by Imperative that said, you know what? Do you feel that you know how to connect with others, and is it easy? And over 50% of employees said, no, I don't. We can imagine why that is in this world these days. So as leaders and managers, part of our job is to create intra-networks, to create the connections, introduce people to others from the team, especially being remote and distributed with some people on site. It's so easy for us to feel left out. And what does that do? Well, the stats are here on the screen. And again, I'll give you an opportunity to get this presentation, but we see, job performance go up, and the number that we care about so much on this call, the focus today, huge drop in turnover and an increase in eNPS. That means people are going out and they're starting to promote your organization. They're talking about how great this is because they have friends and meaningful relationships in that workplace. So it also buffers us against stress and FUD and VUCA. There's a researcher named Kelly McGonigal, great TED Talk on the impact of stress, but she says that we have a built-in mechanism to stress, and that's human connection. we actually let off hormones like oxytocin and serotonin that prime our bodies to go out and connect and to trust others. So connectedness insulates our organization. So how do you do that? If you're a remote or distributed team, consider carefully what your plan is to get people together in person. Quarterly in-person opportunities, for example, using the office space in different ways. If you're a small business that has people coming into works, how do you give permission for people to connect on the job? Not off the job. It's not my role to worry about that. They can go make friendships otherwise. We know connectedness is central to our experience of work. So we should be prioritizing that, just like something else that gives us those kind of statistics, shouldn't we? Yet it feels funny. It's hard to make a plan and prioritize friendships, but that's what organizations are doing that are adapting and changing. So this is HubSpot. They have been number 2 and 3 best place to work on Glassdoor and been thriving through the pandemic. And they have pancake breakfasts every Friday. So leaders come in and a different leader volunteers every Friday to make the pancakes, to get messy, to put the waffles in the iron. And it gives them the opportunity to just connect on something outside of what they do for work, but on work time. So we have to think of ways we can give people this permission to prioritize relationships. Here's another tool for you, a micro connection. Studies say it only takes 30 seconds to make a meaningful micro connection these days. Anybody can do that, right? And one of the secrets is to share something that others find in common and to share something that's true about yourself. So imagine, if you're virtual or in person, that you do something like the drop-in. It's going around taking a few minutes in the beginning of the meeting to use a word stem. For example, rotate team members and ask them to choose one. You could say, for example, my people are. So my people are blank. I'm really curious what you all would say. If you can pop some of those in the chat, I'd love to see them. My people are what? For me, my people are loyal, because I have been left many times and alone. You saw my heartbeats. My people are healthy and strong. I was an ultramarathon runner and I'm a yoga teacher. So what is your my people are? And go around and share. So lead this as a leader. Remember, lead with courage so that you encourage that little bit of vulnerability that allows us to show up as who we are in that meeting. So last one here, and then we're going to get to some Q&A. Higher purpose. So this is on the top because it is so strongly supported by the science. But think of it in terms of this, the story of 3 bricklayers. So a woman walks up to the first bricklayer. She sees him laying bricks and she says, "What are you doing?" And he says, "I'm laying bricks." She walks over to the second bricklayer and she says, "What are you doing?" The second bricklayer looks up for a moment and he says, "I'm building a wall." She walks over to the third bricklayer and she says, "What are you doing?" And the third bricklayer looks up for a moment. He looks across the fields and he says, "I'm building a cathedral." So the question is, what are your employees building? Are they connected to something bigger than themselves that they're doing every day that they show up and working towards? Are they building a cathedral or simply coming in laying bricks? So as leaders, ask yourself, how do you connect everybody to the bigger why you do what you do, and bring it forward in terms of shared meaning? So this is about defining something that is a why. It's not your mission. It's not the vision, which is seeing where we'll be in the future. It's why you do what you do. What originally drove you to this work in the first place? Almost 99, almost 100%, it wasn't money. It was something else. It was a desire to be a part of a community or to serve people or to help. So reconnect with that. For example, this is a small business we work with, Alamo Drafthouse. They're a movie theater that serves beer and food, and their purpose came out to be to save cinema. That's why they're in this business, and they have rules around it. They have very strict rules about no texting and no talking in theater, and you can see how committed everybody is to it. They've been called the coolest movie theater in the world. Every day, their employees are connected to this sense of saving cinema through the work that they do. So how can you do that as an organization? So, quick story for you. Kanpa is a small organization in Turkey. They were having trouble with retention sales, morale. They were losing people, and they were thinking about closing their doors in a time of civil unrest. So they came to one of our workshops, and we ended up working with them, and they defined their values. They put those values on every employee's business card, asking the employee, which of these values do you relate to the most? They made it personal for them. And the values then were on the cards. The individuals started to hand out the business cards with what mattered to them. You can imagine their enthusiasm, and the company started to sell itself, according to the founder. They started to change the way they ran meetings. They kicked it off with one thing I'm grateful for, or one thing good that's happened this week. And this is what success can look like. People started to form their own teams, creating events and connecting and building relationships together. They started to altruistically do things for the community. And they also became the #1 workplace in Turkey during a time of civil unrest and VUCA. They saw their applications go from 60 a month to 600 a month. So this is the power of creating a little more well-being at work. So the real question is, what is going to be your story? What will you do different? Because when we start with me, we can extend that to the we and to the community. And that's what we know as the double ROI. That is the ripples of impact on top of the business ROI that you'll be creating there. So, you know, Rumi said, yesterday I was smart, so I wanted to change the world. Today I am wise, so I'm starting with myself. So I think that's about all that we have time for today. There's a few questions here on the screen, but I want to actually hand it over to you, Allison, because you probably have some yourself.
Thank you, Sunny. Wow. Wow, that was so great. Thank you so much. We have so many questions that have already come in, and I'll go through some of the ones we received while many of you were registering. And while I do, if anyone has any additional questions they'd like to go ahead and put in the question box, please go ahead and do so. Sunny, one of the questions we got was creating a company culture at the minimum wage level has been a big challenge. You know, in many cases, we're asking them to do work that they, you know, most people don't want to do, you know, cleaning restrooms and things like that. So what tips would you have for a company who's trying to create a company culture at the minimum wage level, or with employees who are working at minimum wage?
I love that question, because what we see over and over again, it is not so much money that matters. Yes, it matters some, but remember, it takes 20% to lure an employee, a 20% raise to lure an employee away from a good leader or manager. What millennials and the younger generations want, and maybe what my generation and olders, baby boomers too, maybe what we would have wanted if we'd been allowed to as well, is meaning at work, a sense of purpose, a sense of progress, and good, strong relationships. So create and fortify those. Find ways that you spend time with your employees and build those relationships. That creates the insulation against the challenges of higher wages, luring your employees away.
Like the bricklayer building a cathedral, right? Yeah.
Yes, and we have to ask them. We have to really slow down as leaders and say, what motivates you? Where do you want to grow? Because when you are growing, we're not thinking about going. You stay where you grow.
We have another question that's similar, and I think it's a good jumping off point from the last one. And it came through in a couple different formats, so I'm going to kind of consolidate them a little bit. But how do companies that are maybe nonprofits or startups, and the answer may be the same, it might be purpose, but how do those companies that can't offer those competitive salaries, how do they compete with the ones that are offering, you know, much higher salaries to potential employees?
Remember that we want to be ourselves. And so it really starts with creating an environment that people can be who they are. Now, you don't want just anybody in your organization. So if you actually identify the values that you're living by in your organization, you're going to start to put out that, like, bat signal I called it earlier, a beacon, to attract those people. It looks like you're getting your windows washed. But it is a very similar answer. There's things that are more important than money, and now the Great Resignation proves it. People are not quitting because just that they want more money. That may be one reason, but people are struck with the epiphany that they want more meaning in their lives, and they're pursuing it, not just in their life, but also in the workplace.
Thank you. Sorry, they're pressure washing outside my house right now, and water just came through the windows. That's why you saw me quickly get off the camera. I apologize, everyone. But we are just about out of time, and I know we have so many good questions. What we'll do is we'll ask Sunny if she wouldn't mind answering some of these for us in an upcoming blog article, and we'll make sure we publish that to our blog in the coming days or weeks. So be on the lookout for that. And after considering some of the recommendations and reviewing some of the tools that she shared today with your existing employees, we have a number of resources that can help you tell potential employees about your fantastic culture. So you can check out our blog and search recruitment to find some useful tools, including a recruiting checklist, as well as some tips on using advertising to promote your business with prospective employees. And of course, our media consultants are always happy to answer questions or help you come up with a great plan for attracting fantastic talent that believes in your purpose and what you do. So as a quick reminder, a recording of today's webinar will be emailed to you, and we'll be back again this summer with another guest expert and some more great content. So we'll hope you'll be able to join us again then. And please join me one last time in thanking Sunny for her great content. I am leaving inspired, and I hope you are too. So thank you all again, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
Thank you, Allison. Thank you, everyone.